So my name's Ian Palm. I'm a partner here in the Toronto office at Gowling and an active member as part of our blockchain and smart contracts group, as Usman had mentioned. My focus is on particularly on the capital markets side and helping companies grow, helping companies raise capital, M&A transactions. And Anthony's absolutely right. There's lots of activity in Toronto, certainly, and in other major markets in Canada. We're seeing it in Calgary, in Montreal, in Waterloo, and in Vancouver certainly as well. So we've got our panelists here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce them. And the focus of this panel, Anthony sort of whet the appetite for you here, and I'm glad we had some questions, and thanks, Anthony, for engaging the audience. We want to keep that going. Our focus here is on some of the opportunities, and as part of this panel discussion, we're going to talk about some of the opportunities. So Anthony needs no introduction. He's on our my far right here. Next to him is Sunny Ray, and Sunny is the co-founder and president of Unicoin, which was founded in 2013. Unicoin is now one of India's now India's leading Bitcoin and blockchain companies. And he's also very active in a number of other initiatives, including FinTech Canada. Next to him is Alejandro Guerrero. Have I got that right? Close enough? Okay, apologize. My Spanish is not good, as my kids will tell you. He is the special projects leader with SweetBridge, which is another blockchain company, which I'll let him walk us through. And he's got a broad range of expertise in financial sector and commercial software solutions, and has spent time working with First Data and GT Nexus and Infor, and he's got an MBA from Columbia and electrical engineering degree from Louisiana State University. And next to him, and closest to me, is Troy Wong. And Troy is the CEO of Neptune Group, which is a private equity firm specializing in investing in the blockchain sector. And so he is engaged with early stage businesses looking to raise capital focused on the blockchain. So some of the stuff that Anthony was talking about. Troy's been involved with a number of ecosystems, companies such as Jax, which he can get into. He's a chartered professional accountant by training, and he's got experience with a broad range of companies. So that's the panel, and our goal here is to give the folks in the audience an opportunity to understand what blockchain can bring to markets, businesses, governments, other sectors in society, and how these businesses are seizing upon these opportunities. And we've got some questions from the audience already and some sense of what's going on here. What I'm going to do is, before we dive into some of the questions I've got here, and think about questions you may have yourself, because I do want to get some questions from the audience. But before we sort of dive into it, I want to give each panelist an opportunity to give an overview of what they're seeing, what they're doing. And I'm going to start from closest to myself here. So I'm going to give Troy the opportunity to speak first, and then have Alejandro speak after, and then Sunny, and we'll let Anthony sort of reflect upon what the three of them have said. So, Troy, over to you.
Sure, yeah. So Neptune Asset Group is, as mentioned previously, is a private equity firm that's focused on public markets and sort of looking at early stage blockchain technology companies and seeing if there's some synergies in terms of assisting and taking them public and raising them capital. So I think we've seen a huge amount of innovation in the space in the last, it's almost like a shoe drop. In like 6 months ago, the shoe dropped and everybody sort of like wants to get into blockchain. On the public market side, we're seeing companies increasing their share price by 30% by adding blockchain to the end of their name, which is interesting. And you can sort of see lots of junior mining companies looking to change their business and almost pursue blockchain space. So yeah, very, very interesting on the public market side and lots of opportunities.
Thank you. Alejandro?
Thank you. Thank you. I'm definitely the infant in the blockchain space compared to the rest of the panelists, but I collaborate with Sweetbridge. Sweetbridge is a company that develops protocols that take friction in the supply chains and transforms that into liquid value networks. So what do I mean by that? So most of us think of supply chains as boats and trains, but the reality is supply chains manage about $54 trillion in commerce worldwide. And there's a lot of money that is tied up in illiquid assets or illiquid processes in the movement of this product globally. So what Sweetbridge hopes to do is actually to infuse liquidity into supply chains by providing mechanisms to take the assets that live within supply chains and monetize them or get capital from it.
Hi, my name is Sunny. Is this working? Yeah. Okay, so I run one of India's leading Bitcoin blockchain companies. The name of the company is UnoCoin. We essentially enable over 500,000 users in India to buy, sell, use, store, and accept Bitcoin. And I look forward to spending this morning with you.
Cool. So I'm going to talk. I think I'm going to follow a little bit more with the, same kind of reflect on what the others are saying here. But in general, maybe where I see the industry right now, as I said in my talk, I think there's a bubble forming, and we're seeing people jumping in and trying to see how they can relate this technology to their businesses, and we're seeing these ICOs coming out, these ways of raising capital, come up with an idea. People say, let's, like you said, attach blockchain to your name, and you're starting to see these valuations go up. But what I'm seeing is something that's kind of scary for me, is that I can no longer evaluate projects anymore. And that's really interesting for me, because all along, I'm invested in about 30 different projects. I advise on about maybe 15 or 16 different projects. And since 2012, my investments have all panned out, every single one that I put money into. But now what we're seeing is just a surge of these new companies and new marketing ideas, and it's becoming really different to distinguish projects that are really having value and those that don't. And that's scary for someone that's been in the industry for such a long time. So words of caution for me is if someone like myself or my team is having a really hard time seeing where to put money in this space, it's got to be difficult for a lot of other people. And people are always saying, what do I do? And they ask me, where should I be going? Well, first of all, I don't give investment advice. And secondly, I think it's really important that you really learn what you're getting into and try to understand, get out to as many events as you can hook up with people that you really think know a lot in the space. But at the end of the day, it's the wild, wild west out there, and there's going to be a lot of issues, and it's going to blow up eventually, and I just hope that people here are not on the wrong side of things when they actually do.
That's sage advice that we often give as lawyers, and we often get tagged for giving it, but so I'm glad that you spoke up about that. But I don't want to be this, I like this, I think there's massive opportunities in this space as well. I think everyone would recognize that. And I think the opportunity here is to figure out, to separate the signal from the noise. And with all this big data out there, there's lots of data and so on, but so there's some value in that. And obviously we've got 150 people registered for this event. I see there's probably about 100 in this room at least. And people see opportunities here. Why don't we get the panelists to sort of dig down a little bit and say, okay, despite the fact that there perhaps is a bubble, where do you see the value? Where do you see where are you guys triaging this? Where are you seeing the efforts that are useful in creating value, as Anthony said in his opening remarks? And I don't know who wants to take that first.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, definitely. I mean, there's as I said in my talks, this is going to be massively disrupted on every sector, and it's going to take time, and it's going to take many, many years, because I haven't seen any value real created yet. But we're seeing the companies forming, and the ones that do have some long-lasting value will be the ones that really do change all these different sectors, and the different sectors that you're part of here will be massively disrupted. Things will be cheaper. We're going to be races down to 0% commissions, because, as I mentioned, this is a disintermediation technology, and if you're not creating value, then you're not needed anymore. And right now, the third parties, make things more expensive. They make things more expensive because they're facilitating trust between individuals, and they're charging for that. It's that rent-seeking model. It's a model we see in many areas. It's what Uber does. It's what Airbnb does. They basically provide a service, they charge a fee, and they connect riders and drivers. But there's going to be a time where they're no longer going to be needed there, and the connection between the individuals will go right through the technology, which will make things cheaper, which will reduce percentages, and eventually it's going to go down to zero. And what I would like to, and what I've tried to think about for years is what are the new ways of making money? And that's what's going to emerge. If we think these rent-seeking models are the only way that it can work, it's how most of you probably charge for your businesses. You're charging a fee, you're providing a service. Well, when that kind of disappears, how do you still remain value between human interactions? And that's what really should be looked at and thinking, if this way will change, we think that's the only way it works right now, well, what if it doesn't work anymore, and what's beyond that? How do we still continue to create value? And how do we, as things go down towards zero, still remain relevant in the interaction? So it's about solving problems, and it's about saying, if this doesn't work anymore, and it eventually won't, what can we do instead? And makes you start thinking outside the box, and that's when the innovations really happen.
Wow. Sonny, obviously you're doing this day-to-day basis, and you're taking friction out of the system by allowing people to trade Bitcoin in your market. What's your reflection upon what Anthony just said?
Yeah, so for me, the revolution behind all this is the fact that, so let me ask you a question. If you're not passionate about money, don't put your hand up, right? I would say that unanimously everybody loves money. We all go to school our whole lives. We get into fights over money. We get into wars over money. But I would argue that money is probably the most misunderstood thing that every one of us is passionate about. So to me, the thing that really excited me is when I learned about Bitcoin. Prior to that, I did engineering, so I had somewhat of a technical understanding. I also ran my own financial brokerage, and so when I discovered the white paper about Bitcoin, to me it just struck me as like the future of money. And so if you like money, then I would really pay attention. And then the other element is that it's essentially like and if you like the internet, then this is essentially like the internet and money coming together and having a baby, right? and so some of the things I love about Bitcoin is that it's open source, right? Current financial models, Swift, and all these other things, they're not open source. They're run by a couple of people in servers in big buildings. Bitcoin is run by thousands of people like us, right? Like you. I love that. The fact that it's open source. They don't hide anything. The fact that it's decentralized. There's no central point of failure, right? The fact that I just think that Bitcoin has solved a lot of the trust issues that Anthony alluded to. And I do believe that there are a lot of other industries that this technology will tackle. But for me, the real revolution is just understanding that. And my recommendation, anybody who's interested in this space, really just go buy $10 worth of Bitcoin. That's it. Just go buy it. Because if I told you for hours and hours about email and SMTP technology and all that, you'd just go blue in the face and you wouldn't even care. But if I sent you one email and you sent one to your grandmother and you just played with it, you'd probably never go back. So I would just highly recommend just go buy like $5-10 worth of Bitcoin, or just ask one of us. We'll give you $5 worth of Bitcoin. Yeah.
He's offering to give you Bitcoin.
Actually, I meant Anthony. Anthony's going to give you $5.
Anybody still using Bitcoin? Yeah.
Any reflections? I mean, Alejandro, obviously SweetBridge is trying to to reduce the friction in the supply chain space, and you threw some numbers out there which were staggering.
Yeah.
Reflections on that?
Yeah, I think you got the picture now about the opportunity that we're facing and the general disruption and value creation that blockchain brings to our world. I think two fascinating pieces for me. One is traditionally in the global world that we live in, you have seen or you will see that self-organizing networks can address or tackle bigger problems easier than traditional states and centralized organizations. So we're starting to see an acceleration of that. Bitcoin was probably the first one that was able to tackle that. But where I see the opportunity really going forward is more on developing enterprise-grade applications of the blockchain. So far, we've seen the majority of the projects being consumer-based or small proofs of concept. But once it reaches enterprise-grade, then you're going to see a lot more usage and adoption.
Cool. Troy, any reflections on what you've heard there? Some of the companies you're looking at investing into, how are you discerning value from without trying to reflect upon the bubble?
I mean, I think the first thing I was it's very, very, very early stage, as we all iterated, but what I would look at for a blockchain company or an ICO is it blockchainable, right? And so these are known as what's called protocol layer applications, and this idea that blockchains are in its infancy stage. They can't scale yet. There's many different competing blockchains that are looking to provide different solutions to those scaling solutions. And ultimately, ICOs that come to the market that try to address blockchain problems, I think, are perceived to be higher value to us in the digital currency ecosystem. I think those right now we're in sort of a hype craze where this idea, I can't raise money in venture capital, I can't raise money from investment bank, I can't raise money in public markets, but I can do an ICO and raise 50 million for my blockchainable dating app, right? That type of stuff, I think we're all very cautious of, and like those are the type of opportunities that we're saying no to. And so yeah, we're looking for those types of businesses that are blockchainable, that are really solving problems in the blockchain space.
Okay, so dealing with the trust issues and disintermediating things where you've got a bunch of unnecessary intermediaries in the process.
Yeah, so a classic example of like a newer ICO that came out that we were interested in was one called Chainlink. And Chainlink is addressing what's called like the Oracle problem. And it's a real issue that needs to be solved in blockchains. It's this idea that in order to execute a smart contract, you actually need an external data source, right? And you need to bring that external data source into the blockchain and into the smart contract in order to execute. So there's all these sort of questions about like the validity of the data source, the accuracy of the data source, et cetera. And so like Chainlink is one example of like, oh, okay, here's a real need here, right? We believe in smart contracts. We believe that it's the future, and they're providing like infrastructure, protocol layer solutions to those problems.
Can I just add something? Sure, I think it's a very valid point, because just moving an application to a blockchain does not necessarily solve the fundamental problem that society or businesses are facing. In the case of supply chains, they're naturally decentralized and non-trustworthy environments, right? So when I looked at different projects is, are the parties naturally decentralized? Then they're a good fit for the blockchain. Is there trust issues between parties where they don't necessarily want to open up and share all the information with each other? And third, is there a controlling mechanism of the data and the gatekeeping aspects of the data that they share that could be potentially solved automatically without a third-party agent, but by the blockchain? And if those three are fulfilled, I think it's a good case study for blockchain technology.
I guess that's very helpful. That's actually a very useful framework, so thank you. I'm going to ask one more question, but then think about your questions here, and by all means, raise your hand. We'd be happy to take some questions from the audience. There's I'm sure there's some folks here that have a bunch of more questions. So I want to focus on the fact that this is really global, right? So this is a truly global phenomenon. We're seeing blockchain businesses arise from all parts of the globe. We've got we've got people here that, Anthony, obviously you're based in Toronto, but you're representing groups all over the world. Sunny, you've talked about India. Alejandro, Sweetbridge is US based. And Troy, your experiences are, beyond Toronto, obviously. Can you give us your sense of, many of you are active, in fact, from our perspective, we've been an opportunity to engage with all kinds of lawyers around the world and other financial advisors, and we're working with, a broad range of people that are doing some interesting stuff. We're also seeing people looking for some regulatory arbitrage, and I don't want to get into, where to do your ICO. I'm more interested on the business side of things. Where do you guys see the opportunities? Where do you see the vanguard? And where do you get excited? And I don't want to delve into sort of, let's leave aside Canada for the moment. Where else in the world do you see this true innovations happening that you get excited about? And Sunny, you're
So I'm somewhat biased. So just to back up 1 second. So I am Canadian, even though I don't maybe look it. I was born and raised here, and I run a
I'm not sure what Canadian looks like anymore, frankly.
But it's. But I just want to say that we have over 100 employees, and our company is growing. But I think there are some fundamental challenges. Like I'd love to bring our company to Canada, but I think when you look at things like banking, you look at regulation, mostly banking, some of the challenges are pretty intense. And so about India, so a couple of things that excite me. Okay, so you'll often hear people refer to Bitcoin as digital gold, right? When I first discovered Bitcoin 5 years ago, each Bitcoin was $10. Today, each Bitcoin is worth $8,000. 7,000. There you go. So India is the
That's US though. So in our dollars.
in Canadian it's 8,000, right? So India is the largest gold market in the world. Indian women own more gold than the United States government, right? So India also has the most number of IT professionals. So if you couple those two facts together, we think that India has a huge upside when it comes to gold. I just read yesterday that Indian temples have over $1 trillion worth of gold buried under them, right? So gold is highly valued. And the second thing that I think makes India interesting is that Bitcoin and blockchain and this technology also stands to disrupt remittance markets like Western Union and whatnot. And so India is also the largest remittance country in the world. More money goes back in India than any other country from foreign workers. So I think those are the two big opportunities. So again, digital gold and potentially solving the remittance problem. And then third, in a more distant solution, I think people are looking to solve the unbanked problem as well. So how do you bank the unbanked?
I'll go next then. Yeah, I think again, looking at it from a SweetBridge centric point of view, supply chains are global. Therefore, you need to operate in a global environment. But to your question specifically of where is it that companies should be attracted to? What are the environments that facilitate blockchain startups? I looked at it from 4 different elements. One is, as Sonny referred, the speed and agility that you're able to operate based on regulation existing in that jurisdiction. The facilitation to jump on new innovative ways to raise capital, like in the case of blockchain would be through an ICO. Tax structures. Some countries are more favorable on their tax structure than others. And lastly, and very importantly, the community that supports the blockchain environment, right? So there's countries and jurisdictions that are leading on that end, and others that are falling behind and trying to catch up. So there's not one place that I could tell you, well, go there because that has the perfect mix of all these elements. You just have to make your decisions based on the priority.
And Troy, one of you, Alejandro's given us an interesting framework. How can Canada become a global leader in this space, or can it? And where do we have advantages, and where do we need to work on those advantages? Where do we need to improve ourselves to take advantage of these situations?
Well, I mean, I think obviously regulatory certainty would be nice. I don't know if I can think of any other industry or any other business other than maybe like Uber, for example, okay, where if you were to talk to someone and say, what are the risks of digital currencies, ICOs specifically, the number one thing should be regulation, right? They'll say regulatory. Governments will shut it down, right? Regulatory uncertainty, not sure what we can do, what we can do, right? Everyone's monitoring OSC press releases, SEC press releases, very, very diligently, right? And this idea of providing a clear and transparent regulatory framework for economic growth in Canada goes beyond theoretical, okay? So, for example, the Ethereum Foundation is located in Switzerland, right? Yet it was actually founded by Anthony, right down the street on Hispanic King, right? So, I mean, that's literally in our backyard. And that is I can't think of a more clear example of a business potentially, or capital or people immediately relocating somewhere else for a more clear and transparent regulatory framework.
Yeah,
right?
and there was there was reasons why we set up and moved things to Switzerland. At the time, it was 2014, and you could work very easily with the different cantons, the different provinces in Switzerland, and you can work directly with the governments there, and you can provide a business plan to them, and they'll accept it, and you can do it very quickly with them, and it was very simple for us to do. We actually also got approved pretty much as a currency in Switzerland, and that made it easy for us because the taxes didn't need to be paid on the money that was raised when we raised capital through that. So things like that is stuff that countries around the world are setting themselves up for. They're saying, we have the potential here to be a dominant player, to be embracing these technologies, to encouraging entrepreneurs, to encourage startups to come, and that's what I think Canada should be doing. I think in my very early on, I did a lot of community building, a lot of setting up organizations to help promote these digital currencies, promote cryptocurrencies, promote decentralized technologies. I then took a few years to do more business stuff over the last few years, and now I'm going to start shifting back again into doing more of that ambassador role, doing more of that, really ensuring that what Canada does here is going to ensure that we are going to be leaders in these new sectors that will emerge, to ensure that we're going to have new jobs that will emerge from these sectors. And I'm going to start kind of shifting more into that focus again, and that's something I'm excited to be doing. But we can definitely be embracing it. We can be ensuring that the regulators are properly informed and educated. That's the biggest thing, is that probably like a lot of you in here, it's you don't know how to grasp this or handle or really know what it is and what you can do, and it can be quite confusing, but it's up to people like us, and it's up to others in the community to be going and making sure they're properly educated and understanding the potential we do have to be global leaders in something that will be be larger than the internet.
I just wanted to double down on that, is that when Anthony talks about being a global leader, so 5 years ago when I started my company, I was actually living in India at the time, and I was missing these meetups that this guy named Anthony was hosting in Toronto. And so, and because I wasn't here, I actually saw what he was doing and started the meetups in India that have now grown to become the largest, meetups in India. And through that, I met my co-founders, and we started our company. So, so when we think about Canada and this whole blockchain thing being on the map with respect to Canada, I mean, I don't want to big him up too much, but this guy to the right of me single-handedly put blockchain on the map. And not only did he have an impact in Canada, he also had an impact on guys like me who started companies in India. So give him a big round of applause.
So education. So I think that's key. I mean, we tout the fact that we're one of the most educated communities in the world, and we spend lots of time and energy helping our kids and our young people get educated or re-educated, depending on the circumstances. So we've got some experts up here. Who in the audience has a question, wants to get a little more educated?
On that note, just moving further towards the government side, how do you see the inherent conflict of interest playing out over time from the cryptocurrency side, and what governments need to do on their end with taxes and spending and some form of control over that system? We're talking about essentially removing central banks from the equation if you look far enough out. So how do you see that playing out?
There's a tough question. Any more to tackle that one?
Who wants to take that? You want me to take it?
Troy,
Troy?
I can take a
Go for it.
stab.
Troy's offering.
I think.
That's Troy first.
I mean, that question comes up a lot. I think, and first off, it's going to happen slowly, right? And it's almost like we're jumping to the end of the experiment, 20 years, 50 years, 100 years in the future, when the entire economy is Bitcoin, and I think that's highly speculative to think that way in terms of what happens if this or that, right? So it's going to happen slowly over time if it does happen, A. And B, if it actually does slowly grow to become a global reserve currency, it got there because that's the way it should happen. It's because globally it scaled, and you had millions and millions of people all around the world using this very disruptive, important technology, right? And they trust it, right? And Andreas Antonopoulos is the leading speaker in this space, and he always talks about this idea of Bitcoin constantly being attacked, and then it comes back stronger, right? So if in fact Bitcoin does become this major reserve currency, replacing all the central banks, it's because that's exactly the way things should have played out, in my opinion. Right? So it's a free market-based approach to currency.
Okay. Any reflections on that?
No, I just think that this is creating a number of tools that are going to enable a lot more freedom. They're going to enable a lot more ways to we look at, say, what's going to happen. Usually that's fear-based. It's how are we possibly going to deal with these things? Well, the problems will get solved. Better ways will emerge. These technologies will consistently help improve our lives. They will liberate us from certain things. They'll provide more freedom in many different areas. And that's really the important stuff that I tend to focus to, all the benefits that are going to come from these things. And over time, we'll figure out ways to solve these problems. Problems of saying, democracy right now is pretty much 51% of the people saying and being able to tell 49% of the people what to do. That's pretty much what it is. And is that the best system? And there's a lot of fraud that occurs in voting systems around the world, and maybe that's a tool with this technology that can provide through mathematics and through better ways transparency to ensure that stuff doesn't happen. So there's a lot of benefits that are going to come out and will emerge as we slowly change this system into more appealing system that will be better for more people. Because right now the system isn't great, it's the best that we have right now. And these tools and these new systems with consensus-based transparency systems and decentralized systems and permissionless systems will lead to better value, will lead to better benefits for us and for people that don't have even similar systems to what we have right now. And those billions around the world are just really going to start seeing benefits, and they'll start being added to the global economies. And that's where I tend to focus, rather than going, how are we possibly going to deal with this stuff? Well, with taxes, how will it be collected in the future? Things are going to maintain the way they are for quite a while, but slowly, I think gradually it's going to start improving and actually will lead to a lot of benefits.
So Ben Bernanke was just in town a couple weeks ago. He was the man who printed all the money in the US. And so he was literally hired by one of the biggest blockchain companies to come to Toronto and to speak about the future of this technology. And so my point being is and the central banker of India, the former central banker, Raghuram Rajan, is an electrical engineer. He was the chief economist at the IMF, and he's been asked about Bitcoin, and he said that he believes that some sort of technology like this will be at play in the future in India. So my point is that I find that when you pit these types of technologies up against an institution, these kind of confusions come up. But when you pit it up against an individual, when you actually sit with Ben Bernanke or Raghuram Rajan or an individual that works at a bank and you explain what this is, I've never had anyone be able to articulate why this shouldn't happen.
It's interesting you say that. There's I'm reminded of a quote by Milton Friedman, who in 1999 said, I think the internet is going to be one of the major forces reducing the role of government. And then he went on to say, the one thing that's missing is yet to be developed is a reliable e-cash. And this is 1999, so this is more than, or nine years before the creation of the blockchain, and along so
and that's because back then anything electronic could be duplicated, and that was what was solved, and that's why this stuff can start taking off.
Right. So we're moving to the internet of value, and so it's so the economists have got this concept for a long time. I guess what I'm concerned about, and maybe you guys can reflect upon this, and then we can take one more question from the audience, is disruption has happened in a lot of different sectors, both on an industrial level and on a digital level, and we've got a fairly established and perhaps a bit clunky legal process to deal with corporations that fail or businesses that fail and get disrupted, and we kind of deal with it. But when governments get disrupted, and we've seen what happened in the Arab Spring and others, it's quite often kind of nasty. And you guys are all optimistic, and I think that's really important. But how do we address the concerns around disruption that's going to happen, especially if fiat currencies are going to be impacted? And ways in which elections take place in democracies. And I know that's a hard question, but Anthony, how do you answer that question?
Can you say the first part of that again?
So how do you deal with disruption that's going to impact on a governmental level?
So you said on the fiat side of things. So this stuff is coming, and it's not going to be able to be shut down. These are decentralized technologies that live on their own, that are going to come, and unlike things with even the internet or things that are kind of more controlled, this is actually going to lead to some really interesting things, and a lot of great things, and a lot of scary things going to come from it. And right now we're testing things like Bitcoin, so we're starting to see how are people bringing this type of thing. It's been around since 2008. It's a long time already. So we're seeing gradually how people start using this, how it's growing, and because of its amazing values and qualities, I think it's just going to consistently be going. So I don't know how governments are going to actually, maybe when it starts getting more valuable, more important, but they're also scared to ensure that they're not stifling innovation, and that's a big thing, and it's that balance of the two things of how do we ensure that this isn't disrupting the whole way things are working, but at the same time, we can't be shutting this down because people are going to go elsewhere. We do live in a global economy, and people will be going to, we see a lot of stuff happening in Japan, we see stuff happening in Korea, a lot of great things in Hong Kong, Singapore, guys that, when China says we're shutting this down, we're going to ban it, it's just going to happen elsewhere, and the other guy is going to take advantage of it. So they have to be very careful in how they are dealing with this. And it is a fine line that needs to be balanced, because there are definitely, in my opinion, tons of great things that will come out, and definitely, yeah, there will be some scary things and some things that they have to be concerned about, but hopefully don't let that stop them from really embracing and bringing this forward.
Yeah, sorry. No, I was just gonna say that I actually think it's really cool or sometimes really interesting to say things like it's gonna, disrupt governments. But I actually don't think that's gonna be the case. I actually think it's just gonna exist in parallel, just like how email has not replaced the post office. And in fact, I think that this technology, if anything, will actually help keep governments and banks more honest. Because if you keep printing money, the price of Bitcoin will keep going up.
I'll just add really quick that with any innovation, you're always going to have bad and foolish actors that will do harm if they get hold of the technology, and you'll have good actors that improve society and the benefit of society. As far as the future of fiat in regards to crypto, I think we're still thinking in terms of or within the constructs of fiat as a legal tender, but it's no different than how you have a rewards system with your credit card company. That's some form of currency that you get to use within that closed system, and then you use fiat within a certain system, and you use the credit card within a certain system. So it's a method of payment. If I had a crystal ball, I would say in the future, yeah, you're going to see an emergence of more tokens. There's going to be abundance of tokens, and those that subsist will be based on the utility value that you can get out of that token. So there could be a token that is used for supply chain payments, and there might be a token that is used for paying taxes. Coincidentally, if you look back at the history of money, as Sonny said, in the 1800s, there was thousands of banknotes in circulation in the U.S., right? So there wasn't a single one that people used. So in some ways, we're regressing towards that environment by having this plethora of tokens. But I think there's going to be a process of elimination by utility of the token.
Right. So something like there's 2,000 cryptocurrencies out there today, and there'll probably be a lot more in the future, but perhaps a winnowing down to the ones people see of real value. We have time for one more question. I'm going to get one from towards the back there. That gentleman right there. Okay. Yes, please.
I'll just speak loudly, it's okay. So to your point there, the existence and emergence of a lot of tokens, do you see security is paramount to an ICO launch and hosting this token? Do you see those tokens being hosted on one or two dominant platforms like Ethereum, or do you see many platforms in the future?
Well, that's a better question for Anthony.
Right now, I think Ethereum is the dominant platform that people are using, because you can very rapidly and very easily deploy tokens on top of Ethereum without having to create your own back-end infrastructures. But I think there will be more platforms that emerge. I don't know if Ethereum will be the dominant one down the road. Nobody does. So I think competition is always great. And we do see, like I know a project that's coming out that's using Stellar as the back end. I know Omni's still got some stuff going on, but definitely right now it's all Ethereum, and it's the dominant force. It's so much simpler than creating all the back-end infrastructures you would need to do. It's already baked into Ethereum. You're kind of riding the rails of the Ethereum network when you do these launches, and it's very simple to whip up tokens, and that seems to be what everybody's using right now.
I think also the question was like liquidity between different blockchains. And so this goes back to my earlier point about sort of protocol layer tokens that we like to invest in. So there's this concept called cross-chain atomic swaps, where a number of very innovative leaders, technology leaders in the blockchain space are basically trying to build out this technology that allow tokens to be traded blockchain to blockchain without an exchange. And so that project or projects are being sort of like actively researched right now, and that would effectively create true token liquidity, because you can immediately move from token to token to token to token, and there's an active liquid price globally, without going through a central exchange. So that's like that's an example of like where blockchain is going ideally, in the future. And it's right now it's still in the development stages, but like we're very excited about it.
I just want to finish up one last thing. So for people who are asking about governments and whatnot, so on December 8th, I'm flying the 38th director of the U.S. Mint to Toronto, along with 30 other prolific people, and we're going to do an event with Gowling. And so if you're really interested in hearing kind of like, not from us, but from people who have been in the system. Yeah, December 8th. And if anyone wants to take me up on the Bitcoin proposition, my email is sunny@unocoin.com.
Excellent. So any final sort of reflections upon and in the space before we wrap it up?
I think one thing that I've tried to do in the industry is not to pick winners and losers right now. I think that it's way too early still, and I think the business that I do right now is creating wallets for all the different cryptocurrencies. And I realized when I first got into Bitcoin and soon after when we did Ethereum that it's not all about Bitcoin. And then I realized after leaving Ethereum in 2015, it's not all about Ethereum. There's a wide ecosystem out there, so I've always tried to support the entire ecosystem and try to bring people together. So that's why we create the wallets, the interface that kind of enables people to manage these digital assets and to move digital assets. So taking more of a holistic approach to the entire ecosystem, maybe rather than banking on one or two technologies, might be a smart play and move to do, so that knowing that we are so early on right now and things are going to be changing rapidly, and to kind of not just focus on one particular thing, but really spread it around in a time like this where things are still emerging.
Yeah, I would just say don't rely on experts, don't rely on reporters, just do your own research, go on Google, go to these meetups, go to these events, but really try and learn this stuff, because if this passes you by and like next year we're sitting here and Bitcoin and Ethereum are 10x or 100x, you're going to regret it. So just read, and then if you don't like it, then don't invest in it, but don't not read.
Yeah, I would echo that. Just get involved if you have an interest in the technology. There's many projects out there like SweetBridge that have ambitious goals, and we cannot do it alone. We invite people with certain expertise, legal expertise, financial expertise, to come join us and help us shape that vision. There's many projects like that, so get involved, participate, and that's how you're going to learn.
Sure. I mean, I would end it with everyone sort of has their light bulb moment, right? The quoted time that a person first hears about blockchain or Bitcoin and them actually buying it is generally 2 years, is a number that I've heard quoted by a number of digital currency experts, and they always wish they got in earlier. And so I would just recommend really understand it, do a lot of reading, and ironically enough, one of the best sources that I use is actually Reddit, and what I use is I use Reddit, and then you can go to coinmarketcap.com and you can look at the largest currencies, and I would just add the largest currencies and join those subreddits. And basically what you have is the crowdsourced news and opinions of that specific community at any given time. And as you start reading through those articles, you start picking up a lot of the technical knowledge, you start getting understanding of what makes each blockchain different, and you can begin to understand a little bit about the ecosystem. So that's where I get all my information.
Could I just say at the same time, be very cautious with Reddit, because there's a lot of trolls and a lot of shills that it's very dangerous. I've stopped being on Reddit a long time ago. So you can really get lost in a lot of misinformation as well on there with a lot of comments. So please be also very cautious with what you're seeing there and anywhere else in general.
That's great. But you know what? We could go on for another half an hour, I'm sure, and it's unfortunate we have to wrap it up. I just want to thank you folks for being very generous with your time, being very generous with your ideas, and very collaborative with our audience. Thank you very much.